Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started with accounts receivable, managing customer balances. So this will be a little bit different than the other accounts receivable classes where we focused on creating invoices and receiving payments. Instead, we're going to be looking at what you should be doing after we've done those things to make sure we're managing our balances correctly and taking care of any issues before they grow to be potentially bigger ones. So today's agenda, we're going through accounts receivable and order entry. We'll be looking at a customer aging report, unapplied payments, accounts receivable advances, accounts receivable overpayments, undeposited funds, and then lastly, recurring transactions. And so we'll spend a little bit of time in the slides, and then we'll get into Intacct itself. The slides I'm going through here today are available on the website, aldracetraining.info, or in a couple of days when the recording of this is ready, I'll also send a copy of this plus a link to the recording to everyone who's registered for this class. So just a quick overview of what order entry is. We use the order entry application in Intacct to create transactions. We create our invoices, and by creating an invoice and order entry, that creates an accounts receivable transaction. An accounts receivable is where we receive our payments, make any adjustments, deposits, advances, or overpayments that we need to manage our balances, and combine those create the accounts receivable module, which is all of the activity contained within the module. And activity outside of this does not address any potential balancing issues. Journal entries do not address accounts receivable balances. Basically, if we create an invoice for somebody or we receive a payment from someone, making a journal entry in Intacct isn't going to address the entry we've done in accounts receivable. Anything that we've done in accounts receivable can only be corrected or completed by doing another action in accounts receivable. And this process basically works just like purchasing. So I have the little purchasing bubbles below there where we create all our transactions in purchasing, just like order entry for receivables. Our purchasing transactions eventually become an accounts payable bill. And combined, that's what creates the accounts payable module. And a similar way to think about this, or maybe one of the easiest ways, is if we have an open purchase order, we can't do a journal entry to get rid of the balance because the purchase order still stays open. Or if we have a travel reconciliation, we can't just do a journal entry and walk away from it. The travel rec still sits there pending. So our activity has to be done inside of the module we're using. And for today, we'll focus on accounts receivable. And this is basically the split of what everybody's doing. In order entry, we have solid waste, IT, adult corrections, alcohol treatment, Koya, K&I, daycare, our insurance program for the premiums and claims, Tribal Utility Commission for those energy fees, TED loans, and then the program monitors for grant awards. They all create a type of invoice in order entry. And the creation of that flows into accounts receivable. However, in addition to those, the travel monitors use a travel module, and when they're ready to receive a payment from somebody, if they've traveled but have reconciled or accounted for the spending of the travel funds for less than what they were issued, an invoice is created in accounts receivable for the travel monitor to take care of. So everything we go through today is going to happen in one of these two areas. So I've got examples we'll look at from solid waste today. Alcohol treatment and adult corrections, and TUC. I'm not going to go through this whole chart here, but this is every action that you can take in the accounts receivable module and how it posts into Intacct. If you create an order entry transaction, it's going to debit accounts receivable and credit revenue. And knowing these types of things helps us resolve any problems we might have. So if a person calls me and asks me to help with resolving whatever issue they have due to a balance or whatever, not most, but all of that is rooted in knowing how these things post to Intacct. So this is available for you to see. So if you ever have questions about an action you've done, you can come here and look that up and say, okay, now I know where or how that's posted. And so now I know what has to happen to clear that thing. So we're going to get into the customer aging report. Purpose of the customer aging report in accounts receivable is to display a list of customers who owe you money. So basically, anytime we run that customer aging report, we'll get a list of who owes the program money. You can use this to see how well you're collecting on receivables. We get two different aging periods. They're almost completely identical, with the exception of how it starts. One starts at 0 days past due, and the other group starts at 1 day past due. So if you do not want to include transactions on the date you're basing the report based on, you would use the second option of starting at 1 day past due to 30 days. You can run the aging report as a summary or detailed report, and that provides a summary for a customer with any amounts that fit into the aging category. The detailed report actually gives you the invoice it ties back to, and allows you also to click on a link to go directly to the invoice. The report by default will include your customers who do not have a balance, but there is an option to exclude those customers if you only want to see people who actively owe money to the program and checkbook you're researching. We use this report to look into customer activity, as most of this won't be reflected on a balance sheet. Unapplied payments will show up on a customer aging report. So if we received a payment from somebody, but we didn't apply all of it to an invoice, or we've received it as an advance and haven't applied it at all, we would see those on our aging reports. This helps us find activity that needs the most attention. So people who are 90 days or more past due. So maybe those are things we're going to research and recommend for write-off at the end of each fiscal year if the collection efforts aren't going to work. And we also get a list of our payments and credits that we need to apply to either existing invoices or future invoices when the customers have additional business with us. Benefit to this report is we can use it to spot and correct potential problems, but it does require that you review this report regularly for your customer activity. And the more frequent you view this, the faster you can address problems. So we're going to Intacct, and we'll go to the customer aging report. And so you can find it in one of two places. If you're using order entry to create your invoices, you can use the customer aging report here. Or if you're like the travel monitors, or you can also use accounts receivable customer aging to get the same information. And when we open that, we can choose a graph or a report. So we're going to look at a report. Here's where we choose those periods of time. Do we want to start at 0 days past due, or does the invoice have to at least be 1 day past due that we're researching? So we're going to use all of it. What day do we want to base this report on? Do we want this a historical at the end of a fiscal year, or do we want the most current information? So it defaults to today, and that's what I'm going to use as the date. And we're going to base the aging report on the invoice date. What date was the invoice created? And so if we want to look for a customer, we type in the customer, and then it automatically types in the next field so it's from buoys to buoys. We could do a range of customers if we wanted to, or just select one as I've done here. If you're using different customer types, you can choose that here to just get a group of those customers using a type rather than the customer name. And we'll use our checkbook and our program, which would be required for majority of the employee level users. We can sort the report in a variety of different ways, which if we're using it for multiple customers, that might be important to sort it by an ID or alphabetically by name or by amount. Got it at customer ID. We can group the report also by a variety of things. So if we're using more than one customer, we might want to group the report so that the customer data is all together for the customer ID, or by type, whatever we want to see on the outcome of the report. We can choose summary or detail, so we'll look at the summary one first. And this is where we can exclude or show customers who have a zero balance. I always exclude them. It's probably not much reason to research someone who has no balance in accounts receivable. So once we have that selected, we view the report. We see a summary for buoys, in which we can see they've had no invoices created today, so there's nothing less than 0 days past due. They have outstanding invoices in the 1 to 30 day range, the 31 to 60, and then in the 90 plus. But this is the summary report. So from here, we might not be able to get a list of what actually, what invoices haven't been paid. So if we click customize and come back here, we switch to detail and then view the report again. Our data would be the same, but now we actually get the invoice number as a column, and then the date the invoice was created, and the amount of days it's been since that invoice was created, or basically how late the payment is on an invoice. So we can see this report is listing the invoices from the oldest to the newest. So that customer would have an invoice that hasn't been paid in our system for at least 1,600 days to one that hasn't been paid in 10, which would be this month's invoice that was generated on June 1st. And so we can use this to make our business decisions about why we have outstanding receivables balances, right? So we would know this customer accounts for $25,000 of our receivables balance. We can see how long it's been since some of these have been paid or not been paid. And we need to make decisions about how to move forward with those balances. Are there other collections efforts that need to be made? Are we going to recommend these balances for write-off? Were these payments that were received and paid and this is a duplicate invoice? The fact that these balances are this old is a flag to anyone looking at this report that it would require more research to make that determination. So we can use it to gauge who isn't paying, but we can also use it for other reasons. So we have another customer we can review. And now we get the opposite. We have payments going back to 2019. And now we know these are payments and not invoices because these are numbers, like check numbers or money orders outside of that program's invoice numbers. And so we can see a collection of at least 90 days of payments received but not applied to invoices. We can see there's some that are in the 31 to 60 day range. And then on June 1st, here's the bill for June's activity for solid waste. So if we work in solid waste and this is the report we're accessing, this is something we should be looking at on a regular basis to know this customer shouldn't be paying us any more money. And we can apply some of these past credits to clear off this bill and not keep receiving money from the person. Okay, do we have any questions for the customer aging report? So if you do, please use the chat box in the bottom right. With any of these transactions, when we use the detailed customer aging report, we do get a blue link where we can click on the amount, and it would take us to a list of all the receipts for that particular payment, and then we can begin researching where this payment came from and why wasn't it applied fully to a bill. It could have been larger than the bill that was due at the time. And of course, now we need to use this for the program. What are we going to do with this credit balance? Is this money we refund to the customer? Should we at least inform the customer what their balance is? And that leads us to the next part of this, which is unapplied payments. So typically we can generate unapplied payments in a few ways. We can receive a payment as an advance. And so likely some of these payments and credits here are received as what's called an accounts receivable advance. Meaning the person doesn't have an outstanding invoice, but they've still paid us. So now we need to be able to document the payment and record that. So we can do that through the advances. And once we receive a payment as an advance, there's nothing else that's going to tell us there's an advance that's due or a payment we can apply. That's up to us to monitor and track. In accounts receivable, besides advances, when we collect, when we use the new receive payments module, when we receive a payment greater than the invoice, we can actually book it to overpayments. So we can create credits in one of those two ways. And then if we don't apply the payments, they become an unapplied payment, much like we just now seen with the last report. And so this tells us there's credit that has not been fully applied, and that our balancing journals will remain unsolved until action is taken. And so we can use a combination of these reports. The aging report can tell us and give us a list of payments that aren't applied, just like we've just seen. We can go to the advances and search. I think they had your name spelled wrong. For the transaction specifically. And then we have to review each one by one. And so here's the receipt of that $25 payment. We can see how it was applied throughout. And then on the invoices tab, it tells us where it got applied. So we would know this $25 payment for this customer has been received, but has never been applied to an invoice. So besides the aging report, we can come right back to our advances if we receive payments as advances to make that determination. We can use the custom list where we create our invoices. So if we go to order entry, invoice, AR invoice for this one, I created a list just for this, a view. So this customer, for activity starting since January 1st, has several paid invoices, so we wouldn't care about that much, but would also have 2 invoices that are either partially paid or still open. So if we were looking to apply credits, we would know that those 2 invoices haven't been paid, and those are eligible candidates to apply those credits to. And of course, we can create our own custom view to only include open and partially paid items and get rid of anything that's been paid. So just outstanding activity, basically. So we have a question about making a deposit and unpaid invoices. We'll get to that just a little bit later in the presentation. So we can use our custom view to find those instances where we need to apply those credits now. Under accounts receivable, we do have a receipts register. The receipts register tells us about the payments we've received. We can look at the current period of time or customize the period of time. We'll look from May to now, back to that same customer. I have details selected, and we view this. This gives us a list of all the payments received from that person in the period of time that we've picked. And so we can see the transaction number, the invoice number if it's been applied, the amount that was received, but the amount that was applied. And we can tell by looking at this list, just since May, there's been 4 payments. 3 of those 4 haven't been applied to any invoice. We've collected a total of $100, but only applied $23.91, which also tells us the one payment we've received an applied payment to wasn't fully applied. So we could run reports like this for our customers to find those lists of balances we haven't applied so that we can take care of these unapplied payment balances. On our general ledger report, if we were to run the report for general ledger, it's not going to tell us payments that aren't applied. So we can only see this while looking for our accounts receivable transactions. Another option we have to us to manage those unapplied payment balances is to run a report through Dimension Balances. So we get to use accounts receivable, our aging report, our registers report, build a custom view where we create our invoices, or we can go to General Ledger, Dimension Balances, and we'll run the same period, May through today. For accounts receivable advances. We use our program, our checkbook, our customer. What dimensions do we want to see? The funding source, customer, checkbook. We probably don't need checkbook for this one. So we'll look for just the funding source and customer ID to show up in our report. And then we get the same information. We don't get it detailed like we do in those other reports, but we get a good summary. So if we didn't specify a customer and left the customer blank on the other report, we will get a big list of payments we've collected but haven't applied with each customer's information there. So we really want to keep an idea of what the red flags are for us when using accounts receivable. That's it. If we're using the order entry, the custom view to see a list of all the transactions we've created. If anything says partially paid or open, that's a flag to us that there's activity that's unresolved. If our customer aging report is carrying credit balances and overdue invoices, those are flags to us that some action has to be taken on your behalf. So if we go back to customer aging, we'll look up a different customer now. We'll look up my house. So we've seen instances where a customer hasn't paid a bill for a long time, instances where a customer has well overpaid the program. And now we see one where we have an outstanding bill that hasn't been paid for 31 to 60 days. And so that bill was created on May 1st. On May 25th, the program received a payment for $40, hasn't applied it to the invoice, and then June 1st, the new bill for this month's services. So as we're managing our invoices out here, we're going to see instances like this where it appears as if the customer hasn't paid a bill, but this would be the result of receiving a payment and not applying it to the outstanding invoice. So if we wanted to see our unpaid invoices, the aging report's going to show that. And I'm looking by a specific person, so my household and Tracy's household, but you can leave that blank for all your customers. If you wanted an entire list of who hasn't paid, or to include not only who hasn't paid, but these instances where payments are actually received and then not applied to outstanding bills. So hopefully that answers the question in the chat box. So these reports are available anytime that you run this report. It always displays the most current information, and from here we can make that decision on what action to take. Which of course, if this were if any of us were employed in the program, we see this is our first inclination that we need to go and post a payment to this outstanding invoice for the amount that's here. And then we can apply the rest of the credit to the new invoice to reduce what's due for the month of June. So that's one way to do this. Apply to the unpaid invoices. We need to verify the validity of these balances. Are these correct? So hopefully, we're not just billing people arbitrarily. These are legitimate invoices. Any of these credits that we have, in this instance, this is an easy application to make. We're going to apply it to the outstanding invoice, and the rest of the credit will be applied to the other outstanding invoice. But in a circumstance like this one, what's the step we're going to take? Is this money that we should refund to the customer? And if that were the case, what steps do we do? If we take that available credit now and then reduce the $23 bill that's outstanding, we would have $634 left of a balance due to the customer. If we're going to refund the money to the customer, we would have to create first what's called an accounts receivable debit adjustment. So we can apply the credit against that debit to clear out the balance due to the customer in accounts receivable. So that clears that. And then our next step is to process a balance sheet requisition to reduce the revenue from the customer since we're giving that money back. And then of course with that purchasing transaction, we'd make sure we'd use that customer's customer ID in the transaction itself to properly account for that. And so majority of these are probably for solid waste. These are all accounts receivable overpayments. We also can receive payments those were accounts receivable advances. We can also receive payments as overpayments. So if we were going to receive a payment from the customer, we'll go back to the example of my household here. We can select our invoices. So here's those outstanding invoices. The May 1st one was billed at $36.55. There's $29 due. The June 1st one was billed at the same amount with the full amount due. So we're going to add these to our receive payment screen. One of the things we see, this is an indication to any of us processing our accounts receivable is there's a column for credits available, and it fills in, tells us there's a credit. So besides all these other reports we've looked at, the dimension balance report, custom view, customer aging report, accounts receivable receipts register, when we're receiving a payment, we're told this on the screen. So if you're using the new method, there it is. There's the amount available. I click on that, tells us what it is, and now I can choose how to apply that. If we're receiving payments in the old way, we see that on this screen too. So Intacct's made available to us any of these instances where we might have these unapplied credits, these unapplied AR advances, unapplied overpayments. They all sit in our accounts as credits. And so we want to make sure that we're taking care of that. And that applies to any of the programs. So, we've looked at solid waste. If I go to receive a payment, from a program, we select our invoices. We'll select one. Credit shows up for this program too. And so if we're going to receive payments from the diabetes program for our outstanding bills, as we're sitting here processing the payments we're going to post, the system is telling you this program has a credit. You can use that credit to apply against those bills, or if that's not a valid credit, that's a payment we've posted incorrectly, we need to go and research this and figure out why is that sitting there, which will be a year next week. And so we'd have to take the proper steps to either apply those against invoices, refund the money to the customer, and if we choose to do it that way, then we need to offset the credit sitting there with the accounts receivable debit adjustment. So we come here, this customer has invoices dating back to 2019 that haven't been paid. So if we're going to receive a payment on any recent bill, the most recent being a year ago last week, we need to figure out, are these bills legitimate, and take whatever corrective action we need to. So let's pick a bill. Customer has an outstanding credit for $8 we could apply to one of those bills. But in every instance of us receiving a payment, besides the other reports, when we receive a payment one-on-one for a customer, we should be checking those things. Why are all these bills sitting out there? Or once we've selected to pay one, why is there a credit sitting there unapplied? And this one's more recent. This is an overpayment and so as we're receiving the overpayment, we could have added another one of the oldest bills and then offset it by the $8 to one of those bills. Okay, any questions for the advances, the overpayments, or credit balances? We're going to move into undeposited funds here in a second. So for all the programs that are using order entry, we're instructed to receive our payments as an undeposited funds, as you guys see me doing on the screen, which is picking our customer and picking the undeposited funds account instead of receiving money directly against a bank account. This simplifies our bank recs because if we receive each payment against the bank account for a single day, if we receive 10 payments, our Intacct records are going to show 10 different debits to cash. However, when the money goes to the bank, on our bank statement, it's represented as one transaction. So receiving the payment as a undeposited fund allows us to basically group all of this together. One of the responsibilities that comes with creating an undeposited fund is that our next step is we have to create a deposit. Once we get ready to create a deposit, we go to accounts receivable, add our deposit, pick our bank account. We get a list of the items that haven't been deposited yet. And so for this particular checkbook, we have a payment we've posted in August of 2019 that's never been deposited. And so as we're creating our deposits, these things should be standing out to us that 2 years ago we received a payment and have never sent it to the bank. Or at least that's what the basic logic would say, is we have an undeposited check for $50 and that this customer has would have a uncashed check in their records. And so we can look for undeposited funds by either trying to create a deposit, getting the list, just kind of like we're doing with our payments. When we look at that receipts register, we get a period of time that starts at current month, or we can do a custom one. That was August of 2019. Well, let's just use the month of August for this report. Customer is C5856. And on the receipts report, it allows us to only show undeposited receipts. So if we wanted to verify our balances or see any list of the things that haven't been deposited yet, we can check that. And when the report runs, we get the list of items for that specific customer for that month that haven't been deposited. We know it's been applied to an invoice. In the invoice column, we get a link to the invoice the payment's been applied to. We have the check number that was recorded for the payment. But here the deposited on date tells us not deposited. And so these are things we need to be looking for managing our accounts. So we can use the receipts register, the cash deposits area. You can run a trial balance report. So if I ran a trial balance for that program, undeposited funds pops out as having a balance. And virtually, the undeposited funds account should never carry a balance because we're receiving payments and then creating the deposit the same day. So we have another way to verify those things. And I think this probably might also address the question in the chat box too. Besides accounts receivable, you have access to an area called cash management. And under cash management, under the All tab, there's registers, there's a deposit register. So if we go back to that month of August 2019, we select that bank account that we want to look at, and we want to see the receipts. When we click view, we get a detailed list of all the deposits that were actually created for that month. So if we had that undeposited fund on August 9th, check number 34426, and then we ran our deposits register, 34426, 34426, that number is on the deposits twice and an undeposited once. But what we can see here is that transaction was actually voided. We have the deposit slip and then the void of that deposit slip. So is this the correct deposit or not? And we'd have to make a decision on how we're going to fix that. if this isn't the correct entry that was supposed to be made, we need to go to the posted payments and reverse this payment. Or if it is in fact an undeposited fund, granted this is 2 years ago, so a more recent one, we maybe then know we have to create a deposit to match the records. If the bank reconciliation is ongoing and the bank has a record of a deposit, but Intacct doesn't show it, Lori, who would be doing the bank rec, is going to reach out to you probably by email to say, the bank says on this date there was a deposit, but I didn't see it on your Intacct records. You need to review this. These are a couple of the steps you could do. One, that we need to look at our undeposited funds balance. Did we forget to deposit this record? Then we can correct that. And we've corrected the issue with our bank rec. Or we can look at our deposits register to see, well, what payments did we include for those? And what did we omit whenever we created the deposit? So hopefully that helps you too, Eleanor. The deposits register for cash management. The last thing we're going to look at is recurring transactions. So for recurring transactions and order entry, currently I think we only have 2 programs that use this in some capacity. Solid Waste uses this because my monthly trash bill isn't changing, and probably the vast majority of us aren't. So they have hundreds of invoices that are generated on the first of every month for them, so then all they have to do is print those and mail them out to us. IT also has active, ongoing, recurring transactions. And so occasionally we need to come here and look at our transactions to make sure they're correct. We can see the result, all of the results all say success, so we know they're running the way they're supposed to. We can see how many times they've ran. We click on the amount, it tells us here's the instance of each time that this ran for this particular customer. So we can see those things. If ambulance services had discontinued their business for whatever is being billed on a recurring basis on the 15th of each month, we can turn off that schedule so they don't get billed in the future. We can view our recurring transactions to make sure it's the most up-to-date information. Most importantly being line number 1, a one-time fee for a new cell phone. So this recurring transaction has ran 12 times for a one-time fee. So if we're responsible for these recurring transactions, we'd want to make sure we're, 1, looking at this list of activity, and 2, are things like the one-time fees that are billing every single month the correct thing that's being billed to your customer? Is this the correct amount showing as due to you on accounts receivable? Is this the correct amount that's being credited to your revenue and then you're using to budget and spend? Or are these things that we need to edit, remove that line? So the recurring transaction, the purpose of this is to automate the creation of the same thing that we do on a regular basis. The same garbage bill we have every month, or if it's a cell phone bill for our monthly cell phone that doesn't change, it's a flat rate for 3 lines or whatever. That's what we would be using it for, but likely not for a one-time purchase of a cell phone, since now we would have billed that out 12 times. And then we look at that, we can then go look at the invoices to see, are we actually collecting payment on something that might not be the correct amount being received? So if we view one of these and go to our payment details, the May one hasn't been paid yet, so we're good there. But we need to make sure that all these things aren't being paid or that we get those corrected. So these are the steps we can be doing to looking at our balances to verify those things. Are we looking at our customer aging report regularly? And then when we see unresolved credits, unpaid bills, what are the things we are doing to correct those? We're looking for our unapplied payments. Are we going to our custom views for our order entry screens? Accounts receivable advances and overpayments. Are we looking at our dimension balance reports to see who has outstanding credits we have yet to apply against invoices, or credit balances that for stuff collected on a couple years ago we just haven't taken any action with? When we receive payments, are we looking at those credits and those other invoices so we can do something about it? And then of course our undeposited funds. So we want to make sure we be looking at those. I'm going to send this out to you guys a few days after the recording comes available. Each of the sections I have a little resolve thing on what you should be doing to address those when you come across those. This should become a regular part of our management of our receivables. No different than purchasing. We should be looking at our open purchase orders. We need to be looking at our open receivables the same way. All right, I see no new questions coming into the chat box, so thank you for coming today. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.